There are rooms where one wrong move ends your career. Brisa Cole walked into one carrying a child. The elevator doors opened and Brisa Cole walked into the boardroom carrying a hard hat under one arm and a 4-year-old under the other. Mara had her mother's dark eyes and a plastic dinosaur in each fist. Preschool was closed for staff training. The regular sitter had a conflict. Brisa had a 9 o'clock meeting with the most powerful man in the city and absolutely no other options. The board members seated around the long table looked at the child the way they looked at cracks in a wall. Like something that should not be there. "Miss Cole," said the man at the head of the table. His name was Fenton. He had the kind of smile that meant nothing. "We were expecting a full presentation team." "I work alone," Brisa said. She set Mara on a chair at the far end of the table with the dinosaurs and a juice box she pulled from her bag. "I don't need a full team," she said. "I need your attention for 6 minutes." Fenton leaned forward to say something that would end the meeting early. Then a voice came from above. "Let her finish." Everyone looked up. The boardroom had a double-height ceiling and a glass-railed mezzanine above. A man stood at the railing looking down. He had not been there a moment ago. He wore no jacket. His arms rested on the rail with the ease of someone who owned the building because he did. Ryu Tae-won. He had bought Valero Tower 6 months ago. His lawyer had recommended Cole Structural based on track record. He had approved the meeting without giving it much thought. Now he was giving it his full attention. Brisa did not look up. She unrolled her survey drawings on the floor, placed the rubber ball at the edge, and let go. It rolled southwest without stopping. It crossed 3 column lines marked on her survey drawing before it reached the far wall. "The floor is moving," she said. "Not settling. Moving. There is a difference and the difference matters. Settling is age. Movement is failure." The room was quiet. The northeast load columns are transferring stress they should not be carrying. Something below is not doing its job. I need basement access, full as-built drawings, and the original steel certification records from construction. Fenton opened his mouth. "All 3, Brisa said. "Or find another engineer." She started rolling up her drawings. Mara held up the blue dinosaur without looking away from it and said, "Mama, this one has a crack too." Nobody laughed. But the man on the mezzanine looked at the child for a long moment and then looked back at Brisa. "Give her everything she asked for," Ryu said. He pushed off the rail and walked back into the shadow of the upper corridor. Brisa did not watch him go. She capped her pen and picked up the rubber ball and dropped it into her bag beside the remaining juice boxes. But she had felt the weight of that voice from the moment it spoke. And she understood, without looking up, that this contract was going to be more complicated than the building. Brisa arrived the next morning with a laminated card. She handed it to the assistant at the outer desk of Ryu's office. The assistant had a composed expression and said nothing while she read it. The card listed 7 conditions. Unrestricted access to all floors. No escort requirement. No request routed through Fenton. Direct communication with building management only. Copies of all approvals dated from construction through present. Full basement and substructure access within 48 hours. And a private workspace with natural light. The assistant brought it inside. Ryu read it once and said, "Fine." By noon Brisa had a glass-walled room adjoining his office. The connecting door between them was never fully closed. She did not think about that door. She thought about the approvals. By the 3rd day she had them spread across every surface of her workspace. 40 years of permits, sign-offs, and certifications. She worked in order, oldest to newest, building a timeline with colored tape on the wall. By the 5th day a pattern had appeared that made her stop moving. One signature appeared on every fraudulent approval going back 15 years. Not always in the same position. Sometimes buried in a review panel. Sometimes as a single certifying officer. But always there. Holt, our Director of Port Authority Infrastructure. She was still standing at the wall when Ryu appeared in the connecting doorway. He did not knock because the door was already open. He stood there with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow and looked at her tape timeline for a moment. "Holt," he said. She turned. "You know him." "I know what he is. He has controlled every approval process tied to former port land in this city since the 90s. My legal team flagged him during due diligence after I bought the tower." He paused. "He does not make mistakes. He makes problems disappear. He's been signing off on things that should have failed inspection," Brisa said. "For 15 years. Be careful how loud you say that." She looked at him directly. "Is that advice or a warning?" He held her gaze for a moment. "Both." He crossed to her workspace, which she had not invited him to do, and set a folder on the corner of her table. It was thick. A legal tag ran down the side. He tapped the label with one finger. The label read, "Mwosu. My team compiled this during my own investigation into the building's history since purchase. I do not know yet if it is relevant to yours." He stepped back. "You asked for basement access." "I did. I will have it cleared by end of week." He left without waiting for her response. The connecting door swung back to its usual position. Not closed. Never quite closed. Brisa picked up the Nwosu folder. She did not open it. She set it beside her bag and looked at her name on the legal tag for a long moment. She did not know that name. But something about the folder's weight made her feel as though she should. The regular sitter sent a cancellation at 6:47 in the evening. Brisa had already told Jean they would be at the tower by 9. She called Ryu's enforcer from the car. Jean picked up on the second ring. There was a pause on his end. "Bring her," he said finally. He sounded like a man agreeing to something he did not fully understand. The basement was cold and it smelled like water and old concrete. Jean walked ahead with a flashlight. Brisa followed with her equipment bag. Mara walked between them holding Jin's hand with complete confidence, as though a very large serious man in a dark basement was a perfectly normal companion. At the third column row Mara sat on the ground and announced she was a bridge. Jean looked at Brisa. Brisa said, "She does that." Jean looked back at Mara, lowered himself to one knee, and let her sit on his boot. Brisa worked. She moved along the east wall tapping columns with the rubber ball. Not rolling it this time. Bouncing it lightly against the steel base and listening. She had learned this from her father when she was young enough to think it was a game. "You listen for the sound the hollow space makes," he had told her. "Everything solid sounds the same. Everything wrong sounds different. Column E4 sounded different." She crouched and tapped twice more. Then she set down the ball, took out a thin probe tool, and ran it along the seam where the column base met the floor casing. The casing panel shifted. Behind it was a space roughly the size of a shoebox. Inside the space was a sealed waterproof sleeve. Inside the sleeve was a file. She opened it. The first page was a structural report dated April 1997. The engineer's name was Adiz Nwosu. The report was thorough and precise and damning. It documented a series of steel certifications that had been falsified for an entire class of load-bearing columns purchased from a supplier called Meridian Structural Products. Brisa turned the page. Her hand stopped. Meridian Structural Products. She had seen that name once before. In a box in her mother's storage room. In her father's handwriting on the back of a photograph of a building she had never visited. He had circled the name and written one word beside it. Fraud. He had been a structural engineer. He had found something in 1997. He had reported it through official channels. Within 60 days he had lost his license, his firm, and everything he had built. He had died when Brisa was in her final year of university. Not from violence. From the kind of exhaustion that does not lift. She had become an engineer to rebuild what he lost. She had been searching for the origin of his destruction for 10 years. It was in her hands right now. The security alarm fired. Sharp and sudden and filling the whole basement. "Move," Jean said. He was already up with Mara on his arm. Brisa sealed the file back into the sleeve and put it in her equipment bag. She did not leave it. She would never leave it. They were out of the building in 4 minutes. The night air hit cold. Jean put Mara into the back seat and stood at the car door until Brisa was in and the locks were down. Brisa sat with the bag on her lap in the dark and said nothing. Mara fell asleep against the window before they reached the first intersection. She did not tell Ryu that night. She was not ready. She needed to understand what she was holding before she handed any of it to anyone. But she understood, for the first time, that she had not taken this contract for the money. She had taken it because the building had been waiting for her. The message arrived at 7 in the morning. Cole Structural's professional operating accounts had been frozen. All of them. The notice cited Port Authority jurisdiction over former port land and cited a code review that Brisa had never heard of under a process that did not appear in any standard manual. She was at her workspace when Ryu walked in without knocking. He had already seen it. "Holt," he said. "I know." He moved faster than I expected. He stood at the window looking out at the city below. "He is trying to stop you from being able to pay for anything. Equipment. Subcontractors. Liability insurance renewal. Without operating accounts you cannot function as a licensed firm." "I know what frozen accounts mean," Brisa said. He turned. "I have a solution. It is not ideal but it is clean." He handed her a document. It was an employment contract. The title line read Chief Resident Engineer, Valero Tower Restoration Project. "As my direct employee you are covered under my legal structure. Port Authority cannot touch your professional license through the firm if the firm is not the contracting entity. You work the same job. You have the same access. You answer to no one except me." He paused. "And I do not interfere with your findings." She read it. It was exactly what he had described. No additions. No traps. She signed it. She did not tell him about the file she had pulled from the basement column 2 nights before. She was still not ready. The connection to her father felt like something she needed to carry alone until she understood its full shape. The call came at 3:42 in the afternoon. It was from a number she did not recognize. She let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was a man's voice. Calm and professional. He said he represented a firm reviewing the Cole Structural accounts. He said she should expect further action and she should consider stepping back from current engagements. She deleted it. At 4:15 she got into her car to pick up Mara from preschool. Mara had already been collected by the after-school coordinator. They were in the car heading home when a black SUV pulled alongside them at a light and stayed there a beat too long. Then 2 men appeared from nowhere. They stepped up on either side of the SUV and one of them simply looked at the driver until the SUV moved on. Brisa did not know those men. But she had seen the way they moved before. She had seen Jean move that way. That evening she asked Ryu directly. "How long?" she said. He did not pretend not to understand. "Since the morning the accounts were frozen." "You put a detail on me without telling me." "I did." She wanted to be angry. She sat with the feeling and let it pass because she was also still thinking about the way the SUV had lingered beside her daughter's window. "2 people," he said. "They stay at distance. You will not see them unless you need to." She looked at him for a moment. "You could have asked. You would have said no." She did not argue that because they both knew it was true. She went back to her workspace. She sat down and opened her laptop and she pulled up the evidence she had been building for 3 days. The accounts. The approvals. The file from the basement. Meridian Structural Products. Her father's name in a box in her mother's storage room. She had been searching for 10 years. She had not understood until now how close the answer had always been. The docks at midnight smelled like salt and engine oil and cold metal. Ryu had arranged access through a contact he did not name. Brisa did not ask. She was there to match sample numbers. She had pulled 3 material codes from Adi's 1997 file. If those codes matched the batch markings on the archived steel stored in Warehouse 7, the fraud was physically confirmed. Documented and dated and tied directly to the columns inside the tower. Jean stood outside. Ryu stood inside the warehouse door while Brisa moved along the racks with a flashlight and a list. First code. She found the rack. She found the batch stamp. She photographed it and wrote it down. Second code. Found. Photographed. Written down. Third code. She was reaching for the rack tag when the warehouse side door opened. A man walked in. He wore a Port Authority jacket with a director's pin on the collar. He was in his 60s and he moved with the certainty of someone who had never been surprised in his professional life. Interesting hour for an inspection, said Director Holt. Ryu stepped forward. Holt raised one hand without looking at him. I am not speaking to you, Holt said. He looked at Brisa. His expression was precise and careful. I am speaking to Miss Cole. A pause. Or rather, I should say, Miss Cole. The same surname as a certain Thomas Cole, licensed structural engineer, whose file I have had in my records since 1997. Brisa did not move. She could feel the flashlight shaking slightly in her hand and she tightened her grip until it stopped. You have your father's eyes, Holt said. I noticed the first day you walked into the tower. I have been wondering how long it would take you to end up here. Ryu said nothing. But Brisa could feel him watching her face. Holt pulled the side door open again. Go home, he said. Both of you. Before this becomes something you cannot walk back from. He looked at Brisa one more time. Your father learned that lesson too late. I would prefer you learn it sooner. He walked out. The door swung shut behind him. Brisa stood in the middle of the warehouse for a long moment. Then she picked up her camera and photographed the third code. She wrote it down. She capped the pen. Third match confirmed, she said. Her voice was steady. Ryu was still watching her. She did not look at him. They drove back in silence. Jean brought the car around front when they reached the tower and Ryu got out and Brisa got out and they stood for a moment in the cold before she turned toward her own car. He knew your father, Ryu said. Yes. There is more to this than the building. I know. When you are ready to tell me, I will listen. She looked at him then. Something in his expression was different from the careful control she had come to recognize. It was not pity. It was something older and quieter than that. She nodded once and got into her car. That night she searched for 2 hours. Adi's Nwosu. Every variation of spelling. Every professional database she had access to. Engineering registry. Publication records. Conference attendance. License verification. Nothing. Complete erasure. As though the woman had submitted a 200-page structural report in 1997 and then ceased to exist. Brisa sat at her kitchen table until 2 in the morning with the Nwosu folder Ryu had given her still unopened beside her laptop. She had not been ready to open it before. She was still not ready. But she was closer. The tracking file was Brisa's idea. She created a PDF report. Deliberately incomplete. 3 different versions with 3 different small errors, each one ceded to a different person inside the tower with access to her workspace schedule. The file had a red receipt embedded in the code. Invisible unless you knew to look. She sent the second version to CO. The read receipt triggered at 11:43 in the morning. Forwarded to an external address linked to a Port Authority internal server. Brisa walked to Ryu's office and put the printout on his desk without speaking. He looked at it for exactly 4 seconds. Bring her in, he said. Seo sat across from Ryu's desk with her hands folded and her face very still. She did not deny it. She looked at the printout and then at Ryu and said, "My mother needs a procedure that costs more than I earn in a year and a half. He told me nothing I gave him would be used against anyone directly. He said he only needed to know schedules." Ryu said nothing for a long moment. Brisa spoke first. "How long?" "3 months." Ryu stood and walked to the window. Brisa watched him. His back was to both of them. "The debt," he said. "The full amount. I will have it cleared by tomorrow morning." He turned. "You are not fired. But you are reassigned to the Meridian Street office and you do not enter this building again without my direct authorization. And you will answer every question she asks." Seo looked at Brisa. Brisa asked the question she needed answered. "What is his next move?" Seo's hands tightened on each other. He said the clearest way to stop a person from continuing something is to give them something they cannot ignore. She looked down. He asked about the child. The room went very quiet. Ryu looked at Brisa. Her expression had not changed but she had stopped breathing for a moment. "Where and when?" Ryu said. "I don't know the details. Only that the school run is the target window." Ryu nodded once. Seo was escorted out. The room was empty except for the two of them. Brisa sat down. It was the first time Ryu had seen her sit down without purpose, without a drawing or a file in front of her. "My father was a structural engineer," she said. "He found the same fraud in 1997 in a different building. Same supplier. He reported it the right way, through every official channel he had. Holt had his license pulled within 60 days. His firm dissolved. His reputation dismantled. He never recovered." She was looking at the window, not at Ryu. "He died while I was in my final year of university. Not from anything violent. Just from running out of the will to keep going." Ryu said nothing. He sat down across from her, which he had not done before in this space, and waited. "I became an engineer to rebuild what he lost," she said. "I have been looking for the source of what destroyed him for 10 years. I did not know it was in this building until I found a D's file." Ryu was quiet for a moment. "He did not die for nothing." She looked at him. It was not a comfort she had expected from this man, in this room, in this conversation. "No," she said. "He didn't." She straightened. "I still haven't opened your folder." "Open it tonight," he said. "I think you are ready." The storm arrived before the forecast said it would. By 7 in the evening the elevators were restricted to essential movement only. The building management team had gone home. The security rotation was down to 2 people. Jean was upstairs. Brisa had stayed late reviewing the column stress models she had been rebuilding all week. Ryu appeared in the connecting doorway. "Power to the lower floors may cut briefly. Stay on this level." She was already working. She did not look up. "I know." He did not leave. An hour later the lights dipped once and came back. Rain hit the glass in long sheets. Brisa had the Nwosu folder open on her desk. She had opened it the night before, as Ryu had suggested. She had read it twice. Then she had carried it to the tower in the morning and spent the day sitting with what it meant alongside everything else she had found. Ryu came in properly this time and sat across from her workspace. The storm made the room feel smaller and quieter than it usually did. "She found the same thing I found," Brisa said. "Adiz Nwosu. April 1997. She documented the fraudulent steel certifications, traced them back to Meridian Structural Products, submitted her full report to the licensing board, to Port Authority Infrastructure Review, and to the City Building Commissioner." She set the folder flat. Within 60 days she was under a professional misconduct investigation. Her license was suspended pending review. The review never concluded. Her employer shut the contract. Her report was classified as an internal working document, which means it could not be used in any external proceeding. She looked at Ryu. 2 engineers in the same year. Same supplier. Same outcome. Different buildings. Different buildings on the same fraudulent foundation, Ryu said. Where is she? Accra. He said it simply, the way he said most things. My team found her 8 months ago. They were trying to trace the building's history before I finalized the purchase. They got to her name through a surviving copy of the original licensing board submission that someone had misfiled rather than destroyed. She had left the country by 1999. She rebuilt her career there. She has not spoken publicly about any of it. Does she know you found her? She knows. My legal team made contact. She said she would need a reason to come back. He paused. I think now we have one. Brisa looked at the folder. Her father's name was not in it. But the same machine that had destroyed him had destroyed Adie's first and had been running for 8 months before it reached him. I have the engineering evidence, she said. Column data, material codes, falsified certifications, structural failure timeline. I have the legal documentation, Ryu said. Holt's decision trail, his conflicts of interest, the paper chain from 1997 to the present day, and 3 signed statements from former Port Authority staff my team interviewed over the past 6 months. They were both looking at the same point on the table. You have been building a case against him since before I walked in, Brisa said. I bought a building that should not have passed its last 5 inspections, Ryu said. I do not enjoy being used as someone else's cover. She looked at him. The storm was loud against the glass. The door between them had been open for weeks. She understood, sitting here, that it had never really been about the door. We have everything we need, she said. Together, he said. Yes. The lights held. Outside, the city disappeared into rain. The social services officer arrived at 10 in the morning with a printed form and an expression trained to give nothing away. The complaint was formal. It cited 3 incidents. A child present during late-night basement access in a commercial building with known structural instability. A child present in a vehicle during what the form described as a road proximity incident involving unknown third parties. A child whose primary guardian had accepted employment from an individual with documented connections to organized criminal enterprise. Every detail was accurate. Every detail had been framed to look like something it wasn't. Ryu was in the outer office when the officer arrived. He saw Brisa's face and he turned to his assistant and said 2 sentences, quietly. The assistant picked up the phone. Brisa sat with the officer in the conference room. She answered every question. She did not raise her voice. She explained the basement visit, the nature of her work, Jin's presence, Mara's safety throughout. She explained the SUV. She explained the employment contract and what it covered and why it existed. The officer wrote things down and said very little. By noon Ryu's legal team had filed an emergency injunction in the civil court. The filing documented a pattern of targeted harassment against a professional employee by an individual who had already been identified in ongoing legal proceedings. It included the timeline. It included the tracking file evidence from the CO incident. It included the voicemail Brisa had deleted but Ryu's team had already recovered from the telecom record. By 2 in the afternoon the injunction had been granted on a preliminary basis. Brisa was in her workspace when Ryu came to tell her. She was sitting on the floor with Mara, who had been brought to the tower by Jean after the school run because no one wanted her anywhere they couldn't see her today. Mara was building something out of survey drawing offcuts and a roll of low-tack marking tape. She had been working on it for 40 minutes and had produced something she described as a very tall building that doesn't fall down. Ryu crouched to show Brisa the injunction paperwork. Mara looked up at him. She considered him for a moment with the full focused attention of someone who had not yet learned to pretend not to stare. Then she leaned over and wrapped both arms around his arm and went back to her building. Ryu did not move. He stayed in that position for a moment that stretched longer than any of them marked. Brisa did not look at him. He did not look at her. Neither of them said anything about it. At 4 in the afternoon, the building's pressure monitoring system triggered a low-level alert. The on-site technician checked the panel and reset it. He logged it as a sensor anomaly. He did not know that the panel had been accessed that morning from a maintenance terminal in the sub-basement. He did not know that the reset had done nothing. The formal Port Authority inspection was scheduled for 11. Holt arrived with 2 officials and a city engineering consultant. He had every right to be there. As Director of Port Authority Infrastructure, he retained review authority over former port land for a period of 12 years post-reclassification. The Laro Tower had 8 months left on that window. He knew it. Ryu knew it. Brisa had been counting on it. She had spent 2 days in the atrium testing an acoustic property she had noted during her first structural survey. The atrium occupied the center of the tower's ground floor. Its ceiling rose 40 feet and curved inward at the upper level. The curve was an architectural feature. It was also a collector. Sound produced at floor level on the north side of the atrium traveled upward and outward and could be heard with full clarity on the 6th floor open balcony above the south corridor. A local news crew was covering the tower restoration story. Brisa had made a call the day before. She had told them the 6th floor balcony offered the best visual angle on the atrium and the ground floor inspection walk. The crew was in position by 10:40. At 11:15, Holt was walking the north side of the atrium with his officials when Brisa appeared from the east corridor. She said his name clearly. At floor level. On the north side. He turned. She asked him, in the calm and specific language of someone who has spent 10 years preparing for a question, whether Meridian Structural Products had ever submitted falsified batch certifications to Port Authority Infrastructure Review under his signature. He told her to stop. She asked whether Adiz Nwosu's 1997 report had been classified as an internal document on his instruction to prevent it from being used in external proceedings. He moved toward her. She asked whether Thomas Cole's license suspension had been initiated through Port Authority channels following a phone call Holt himself had made to the licensing board chair. Holt stopped. He spoke. He spoke for 3 minutes. He explained, in the measured tones of a man who believed himself untouchable, exactly what he had done and exactly why it had been necessary and exactly how small and irrelevant both Adiz Nwosu and Thomas Cole had been in the management of a much larger system. On the 6th floor balcony above, the news crew's audio was running clean. By 11:40, Holt was in the custody of 2 officers who had been waiting in the building lobby since 10 o'clock. Brisa was already walking east. She had flagged column J7 in her stress models the day before as a secondary concern. Load redistribution following the pressure system interference had pushed new stress into the northeast section. She had not had time to run the full analysis before the morning. She was running it now in her head as she walked. She reached the northeast corridor and stopped. The column had a visible stress mark along the baseline that had not been there yesterday. She pulled out her phone and called Jean. "Get Rio and get everyone off the northeast floor. Now." She did not wait for the response. She was already moving toward the load panel at the end of the corridor. She had one tool, 12 minutes of calculation, and a building that had been waiting 27 years for someone to save it. The column did not fall. It did not fall because Brisa reached the load panel before the pressure differential reached its breaking point, and because Ryu was beside her 40 seconds later, having come down the northeast stairwell at a pace that Jean would later describe as the fastest he had ever seen the man move. She went straight to the load panel. She isolated the pressure interference in 4 minutes and killed the active feed. Then she pulled 2 emergency shoring clamps from her equipment belt and set them at the column base. Ryu held the flashlight and did not ask questions. He did not speak except when she spoke first. When she stood up, it was done. They stood in the northeast corridor in the dust and the low light and said nothing for a moment. "J7 is stable," she said. He looked at the column. Then at her. I know. I was here. She looked at him. He almost smiled. The restoration work took 4 more months. It was slower than the original estimate because Brisa found 3 additional column concerns during the northeast reinforcement phase, and she was not the kind of engineer who marked things as acceptable when they were not. Ryu did not push her timeline. He did not interfere with her findings. He did exactly what the employment contract had said he would do. Adiz Nwosu arrived on a Thursday morning in early spring. She was a small woman with a precise handshake and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. She walked the tower floor by floor with Brisa and did not speak for the first 2 levels. On the 3rd level she stopped at a column and put her hand flat against the steel. I thought no one would ever find it, she said. Someone almost did in 1997, Brisa said. Adiz looked at her. Your father. Yes. They stood there for a moment. 2 engineers in a building that had been trying to tell the truth for 27 years. Adiz signed the restoration engineering report as co-documenting engineer. Then she handed the pen to Brisa. Brisa signed her name below hers. The formal corrected record was already in process through Ryu's legal team. Thomas Cole's name would be added to the official registry within the month. Brisa did not need to see it today. The work was enough. There was no ceremony. The building did not need one. It had been waiting for this longer than anyone in the room had been alive. Ryu was standing near the east wall. He had not said much all morning. He watched Brisa cap the pen and hand the report back to the building manager. When the room cleared he walked over. Cole Structural's contract is technically complete, he said. Technically, she said. The structural monitoring phase runs another 8 months. I need an engineer of record on site through that period. He paused. I could advertise the position. She looked at him. You could. I am in no hurry for the job to end, he said. Outside the tower the city moved the way it always did, without knowing or caring what had been corrected inside these walls. But inside, in the ground floor registry, 3 names now stood where silence had been. Brisa did not say yes. She did not need to. She was already reaching for her survey drawings.